Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working as a phone technician contractor at a major superstore chain for about 3 years now. It's a pretty sweet gig. I get to be my own boss since I'm not directly employed by the store. While I technically have the right to refuse service to anyone, I usually don't because hey, everyone has bad days, right? Well, that changed after what happened yesterday. Here's the thing about being a contractor. I handle everything phone related in the store, from sales to repairs to activations. The store loves it because they don't have to train their staff, and I love it because I set my own schedule. The only downside is dealing with interesting customers. Yesterday started like any other day. I was at my desk going through some paperwork when this woman walked up. She must have been in her mid-60s with enough makeup to supply a theater troupe and hair styled into this massive beehive that made her head look twice its size. She placed her phone on my desk and simply said it wasn't working. Fair enough, I deal with this all day. After a quick inspection, I discovered the phone was completely bricked. When she asked what we could do about it, I explained that replacement would be the best option, mentioning that I had the same model on sale for $49.99. She immediately refused to buy a new phone, insisting that since she bought it here, she wanted an exchange. When I asked for her receipt, everything went sideways. Her face turned red under all that makeup, and she started screaming. She ranted about how she bought the phone almost a year ago and didn't have the receipt anymore. She demanded that the company honor her as a guest and replace the broken phone for free. I tried to calmly explain that store policy didn't allow exchanges after 30 days of purchase. This only made her angrier. She accused me of trying to scam her out of $50 and blamed me for her phone being broken, calling it a cheap piece of garbage. I attempted to explain that while the store couldn't help, the phone might still be under the carrier's warranty, and I offered to call them. But before I could finish speaking, she grabbed my stapler off the desk and held it up threateningly. She screamed that I had better get her a phone right then or she'd throw the stapler at my head. I remained calm and told her that threats wouldn't solve her problem, again offering to contact the carrier about the warranty. In response, she threw my stapler to the ground, breaking it, grabbed her phone, cursed at me, and stormed off. She came back 5 minutes later with the store manager and security guard in tow. The manager asked me to explain why I wouldn't help the woman, but before I could finish, he interrupted to ask when exactly I had thrown a stapler at her. This woman was trying to frame me for assault over a $50 flip phone. When I tried to explain that she was the one who had threatened me, she interrupted with wild accusations, claiming I had thrown the stapler and threatened to choke her. She demanded my arrest. The security guard asked if I could prove my side of the story, and I suggested checking the security cameras. The woman immediately flew into a rage, screaming about how dare they believe me over her. The security guard tried to explain that they needed the full details for the authorities, but she changed her tune, saying she didn't want to wait for police and just wanted me fired. When the guard pointed out her contradiction about wanting me arrested earlier, she accused him of putting words in her mouth and again demanded I be fired. The store manager had to explain that they couldn't fire me because I wasn't actually a store employee, but rather a private contractor. He suggested they review the security footage to verify her claims. When we all watched the tape and saw her grabbing the stapler and threatening me, she completely lost it, screaming about how we were all conspiring against her and threatening to sue everyone for tampering with evidence. As she headed for the door, she noticed me trying to hide a smile. Big mistake. She whirled around, slapped me across the face, and spat at me. The security guard immediately tackled her to the ground and called the police. When they arrived, they asked if I wanted to press charges. After what she'd put me through, you bet I did. Later, the store manager apologized and told me they'd issued a permanent ban on her. If she ever shows up again, she'll be arrested on site. Apparently, my footage was the final piece of evidence they needed to build a case against her for multiple counts of assault and attempted fraud. I've been working as a cashier at this gas station in Montana for about 2 years now. It's not a huge city by most standards, but it's one of the bigger ones we have here. The pay is decent, and my co-workers are generally good people. I usually work the evening shift, which can get pretty interesting sometimes, but nothing like what happened last night. My shift lead called me earlier that day asking if I could come in early to help cover someone who called in sick. Being the team player I am, I agreed. The shift was going smoothly until about an hour before I was supposed to leave. That's when things started getting weird. Our shift lead had to step away to take an important call from corporate since our manager was off that day. Right after they left, a bus full of teenagers showed up. I couldn't just leave my coworker alone to deal with that crowd, so I decided to stay and help out. I was dealing with this teenager who wanted to buy some tobacco products. When I asked for his ID, he started giving me the usual, "I must have forgotten it" excuse. That's when she appeared. This lady just cut straight through the line holding two 20-ounce Coke bottles she'd found in the 1-liter cooler. She demanded to get the bottles for free because they were in the wrong cooler. I tried to explain politely that it doesn't work that way and that someone had probably just put them back in the wrong place. She got even more upset, claiming she was a regular customer. I had to cut her off and tell her that I'd never seen her before and asked her to leave if she was going to be difficult. She stormed out, and I turned back to the teenager to ask again about his ID. He just shook his head and left. The next customer needed to prepay for gas, so I looked out the window to check their pump number. That's when I noticed white smoke coming from Karen's car. A minute later, she came charging back in, demanding to use our phone. I let her, thinking she needed the tow truck. Instead, she called the police and started making wild accusations. She claimed that I had destroyed her car, assaulted her, and even tried to kill her. When the first police officer arrived, I got my shift lead, who had to end their corporate call to pull up the security footage. The video clearly showed some guy from Karen's car messing with the engine before getting back in, and then Karen going out before the smoke started. She then started screaming for a manager. I had to call our manager in on their day off because of this woman. She was getting so worked up that the first officer called for backup. A sheriff showed up with an ambulance because they thought she might be on something. Surprisingly, she tested clean. The sheriff asked if I wanted to press charges against her, and I didn't hesitate to say yes, emphasizing that I wanted to pursue as many charges as possible. The first officer had to physically escort her out while she was still screaming about how I supposedly sabotaged her car because she wanted free sodas. The sheriff asked me to come down to the station to file charges, and I finally got to leave work 3.5 hours after my shift was supposed to end. Just before I left, my co-worker told me they overheard the sheriff talking about charging her with filing a false police report, attempted fraud for trying to get free drinks, disturbing the peace, and something about misuse of emergency services. I later found out she also got banned from all our chain's locations in the state. The security footage showed her companion actually breaking something in the engine right before she came in, demanding free drinks. Looks like they were trying to run some kind of scam and it backfired. Too bad for them, our cameras catch everything. I've been with my company for over 6 years now, working in the accounting department. Started as a junior accountant and worked my way up to senior position through consistent performance and dedication. Every year without fail, my reviews were stellar, always exceeding expectations, taking on additional responsibilities, and mentoring new team members. The raises followed naturally, and I felt secure in my position. Everything changed when our CEO announced his retirement 3 months ago. He was one of those old-school leaders who valued loyalty and hard work. Under his leadership, our company had one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry. The workplace culture was professional but relaxed. We got our work done efficiently without unnecessary corporate politics. His replacement turned out to be a complete nightmare. First week on the job, she started making sweeping changes, most of which seemed designed to push out the long-term employees. I later found out why. She wanted to bring in her people from her previous company, but firing us outright would mean paying unemployment benefits. So instead, she opted for a more underhanded approach. It started with nitpicking every little thing. Suddenly, our casual dress code wasn't professional enough. Our flexible work hours were disrupting team cohesion. Every minor mistake was documented and blown out of proportion. The stress levels in the office skyrocketed. The final straw came last week. I had sent a simple email to my coworker in accounts payable, just asking them to let me know when they received the Johnson invoice that was supposed to come across their desk that day. Simple, straightforward, and professional. Right? Wrong. According to our new CEO. She called me into a Zoom meeting that afternoon. She started by telling me she needed to discuss my communication style, claiming that the email I sent that morning was inappropriate and rude. When I asked for clarification about which email she meant, she specified it was the one to accounts payable about the Johnson invoice. I asked her to help me understand which part was rude, explaining that I wanted to improve if I'd made a mistake. She suggested we go through it and asked how I'd started the email. When I mentioned I'd said, "Hey," she prompted me to continue. I explained that after that I'd simply asked about the invoice. She then pointed out, rather triumphantly, that there was no greeting or pleasantries, questioning where the Happy Tuesday or "I hope you're having a good day" were. I tried to clarify by asking if she meant the email wasn't actually rude but just lacked fluff. She responded by lecturing me about maintaining a certain level of professional courtesy in our communications, insisting my email was too abrupt. I quietly acknowledged her feedback and assured her I'd add more professional courtesy. That evening I composed my masterpiece. I wrote her the most over-the-top, sickeningly sweet email imaginable. I gushed about her red sweater from the Zoom meeting, mentioned my dog walk in the park, and even talked about the weather. I layered on excessive praise about her leadership style, mentioned exact number of days I'd been with the company, and even threw in a comment about her succulence. The whole thing was dripping with sarcasm, but technically followed all her rules about professional courtesy. The response was immediate. I got called into another Zoom meeting, this time with human resources present. The CEO was absolutely livid, her face turning as red as her sweater. She accused me of being completely unprofessional and insubordinate. When I expressed confusion and pointed out that I'd included all the required elements, greeting, pleasantries, personal touches, compliments, and even the weather, she grew even more frustrated. The human resources representative asked me to explain the context of the email. I walked them through our previous conversation about email etiquette. While they maintained a professional poker face, I caught the slight twitch at the corner of their mouth. The next day, a company-wide email went out clarifying the email communication guidelines. Apparently, several other employees had filed complaints about similar micromanagement of their communications. The email stated that while professional courtesy was expected, employees were not required to include personal greetings or commentary in work-related emails. 2 weeks later, I got called into another meeting, this time with the board of directors. They wanted to discuss the numerous complaints about the new CEO's management style. They had received dozens of documented instances of harassment and inappropriate micromanagement, including my email exchange. The CEO resigned the following week. The official announcement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Her replacement, the human resources representative who had witnessed my malicious compliance. Their first act was to reinstate our original workplace culture and eliminate all the unnecessary improvements our brief dictator had implemented. I still keep a framed copy of my fluffy email in my desk drawer. I've been working at this local department store for about 3 years now. Started right after graduating high school when I realized college wasn't really my thing. My mom wasn't too happy about it, but I actually enjoy retail most of the time. I worked my way up from seasonal help to full-time, and I take pride in what I do. The store has been pretty strict about COVID protocols since the whole thing started. We've got signs everywhere about masks and social distancing, and most customers are actually pretty good about following the rules. But there's always that one person who thinks they're above it all. So there I was, heading in for my closing shift. It was a chilly afternoon and I was wearing my favorite jean jacket, the one I got from my grandmother before she passed. I always try to get to work about 15 minutes early because I like having time to settle in, punch my card, and catch up with my coworkers before hitting the floor. When I was walking in from the parking lot, I spotted this guy near the entrance. Now, I wouldn't normally care what customers do, but this one immediately caught my attention because he was practically breathing down this poor woman's neck. He had his mask pulled down to his chin like some kind of fashion statement, leaning way too close to her while pointing at something on the shelf. I politely asked him to maintain a safe distance and pull up his mask. The guy whipped around like I'd just insulted his entire family tree and snapped at me to mind my own business, insisting that I didn't even work there. I could see my store manager coming up behind him, but I wasn't about to back down. 3 years of dealing with entitled customers had given me plenty of practice in keeping my cool. I told him that I did in fact work there, and my shift was starting in 5 minutes. I added that if he wasn't willing to follow the rules posted on the entrance doors, he was welcome to shop elsewhere. The guy started yelling about how I couldn't talk to customers like that and demanded to speak to my manager. With a bit of satisfaction, I pointed out that the manager was standing right behind him. The guy spun around so fast I thought he might get whiplash. My store manager, who was standing there with his arms crossed, looking less than impressed. When the manager asked if there was a problem, the guy immediately started complaining about how I was being rude and harassing him. My manager shut that down quickly, telling him that he'd watched the whole interaction and the only person being inappropriate was him, adding that our mask policy was non-negotiable. The guy started sputtering, still trying to be right somehow. That's when I sweetly asked if he needed help finding the exit. The woman he'd been hovering over actually snorted at that, which seemed to finally make him realize how ridiculous he was being. He yanked his mask up with way more force than necessary, but the damage to his ego was already done. My manager then told him that if he planned to stay in shop, he needed to maintain proper distance from other customers and keep his mask on correctly, otherwise he could leave. The guy mumbled something under his breath and skulked off toward the housewares section, keeping his mask up this time. The woman he'd been harassing turned to me and thanked me, explaining that she'd been trying to figure out how to get away from him without making a scene. My store manager waited until the guy was out of earshot before giving me a silent round of applause and an elbow bump as I headed to the back room. Later that night, he actually wrote me up a formal commendation for handling the situation professionally while enforcing store policy. That guy came back a week later, properly wearing his mask and keeping his distance from everyone. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.